Says it's loading. I think we're live. Welcome back to the GamecockScoop podcast. I'm Alan Cole, joined by Steven Anderson. Caleb Alexander is not here this week. We're going to talk about baseball. I think y'all probably already knew that was coming, but last week I recorded with Caleb. We were talking about the bracket, the draw, kind of if South Carolina had a path out of the Raleigh regional. And, well, we know the answer to that now. Before I get into that, first of all, Steven, how are you?
I'm doing great, Alan. How are you doing?
Good. It's good to have you on here. Steven's kind of our baseball, women's basketball guy at the website. So we'll get into it quickly. I don't think the details of the regional matter a lot. For those of you listening to this show, you probably already know what happened. You want to hear our thoughts on the coaching search. But if you did miss it, South Carolina goes 1-2 in Raleigh. They beat James Madison 8-7 in 10 innings on the first day. Cole Mesquita hits a game-tying 2-run homer in the ninth. Walk-off sac fly wins it in the 10th. You get into the winner's bracket, you lose a pretty competitive, but a game you never led, 6-4 against NC State Saturday. You were back in the loser's bracket, needing to win 3 in 2 days, and your season ends with a 2-0 shutout loss to James Madison. James Madison's only shutout of the season, Sunday afternoon. You're shaking your head there already. Mark Kingston is relieved of his duties the next morning. So that's kind of the rundown of what happened in Raleigh. I don't know if you had any specific points on the regional itself before we move on, but that's kind of where I think you start.
Real quick, just I don't want to spend too much time on it, as you said, but what was the thought on or did Kingston have any comments that I missed about Will Tippett being called out for running in fair, allegedly running in fair territory on that bunt attempt? I believe that was the James Madison.
Yes, that was the second game against James Madison. South Carolina was down 1-0, I think in the 5th or the 6th. Yeah. Tippett puts a bunt down. He's called out running out of the baseline on a throw that actually hit him in the back. I think he was asked about I don't think he was asked about that play specifically. He was asked about the 2 replays in general, because later in that game, Dylan Brewer was called out for leaning into a pitch in the 9th. He just said the ump just told him that, there was clear and obvious evidence of 1 of Tippett being out of the baseline, of 2 of Brewer leading into the pitch. He did not address the play you were asking about specifically. He just kind of said there was 2 cases of replay and they both went against South Carolina.
My guess was he had other things on his mind at that point in time after that loss.
Yeah, that's probably fair. And I don't want to make it sound like replay cost South Carolina that game. They were 0 for 20 for the weekend with runners in scoring position in the regional and 5 for 38 runners on base. So that brings us to today. It's Thursday at about 3 o'clock as we're recording this. I put out a hot board. You put out a hot board. Kind of what's your initial thought on this coaching search? I guess not initial anymore. We're 3 or 4 days in. But kind of how do you feel about this search right now, I guess?
Well, like me and you were talking before we came on, Alan, the most trendy name on message boards and Gamecock social media is Monty Lee. And for probably a decent reason. I think he's probably a legitimate top 4, top 5 candidate at this point in time. But like we were saying, if he was the guy, and he was certainly the guy, there's no reason not to announce that at this point in time. He's actively recruiting the portal. He's actively flipping high school recruits, like the kid from Myrtle Beach. So he is he's filling in the interim. He's doing everything he's supposed to be doing at this point in time. But I do think there's going to be a few guys that Ray Tanner's going to have ahead of him on the list. I know we've talked about him. He was on the boards. Cliff Godwin from East Carolina, and I know we want to get into him a little bit more because there's some developments with their program that have kind of happened in the last 48, 72 hours since they lost. They were upset in their regional by Evansville. Evansville took South Carolina to a regional final one year. I think it was 2006.
Yeah, in Charlottesville, I think.
In Charlottesville, yeah, they did. They knocked out Virginia and then took South Carolina to a decisive final game. But anyway, they're one. The other are kind of some ACC guys. Chris Pollard at Duke. Walter at Wake Forest, I think is somebody that's probably being at least vetted or considered, as you wrote on your hot board this week. Both those guys are private school coaches, and we don't have any idea what their buyout was going to be. I know they say that the buyout, not necessarily a high buyout, won't be prohibitive, but just in the history of Ray Tanner coaching searches, he does not have a long history of paying big buyouts on other coaches. So I even though we hear that repeatedly, that just never is the case on any of his coaching searches. So I'm not going to believe that here, that if there's a large buyout, that he is more than willing just to pay that if there's somebody else on the board he likes.
So I agree with you on that. And then you kind of start thinking about the cheap side of things, and there wouldn't be anything at least financially cheaper than Monty Lee, the guy who's already in your building, the guy who's technically the head coach right now. They named him the interim just to kind of keep things together with the transfer portal opening on Monday and recruiting and everything you said. Let's just start on Monty for a second here before we kind of branch out, because I've heard what you've heard. We all have that Monty's in the mix right now. Well, if that ends up being the move, if Monty Lee's the head, because I have thoughts on this too. How would you feel about that? Would you maybe grade that higher? What would you, if Monty Lee ended up getting this job?
Well, on its face, I'd say it's probably about a C, just because the track record of Clemson is tough to get over. The last 2 years of Clemson failing to make the NCAA tournament, having a losing record there, it's kind of like having a losing record in South Carolina. But they just don't happen very often at either of those two programs. So that's a little tough to get over. It just seems like that's the safe fallback, and that even though this is not going to be the case, we know, I'm certain Ray Tanner's vetting other qualified candidates, but it's going to at least have the appearance of simply, let's just go with the safe guy that we all know that we know is there, and get it. But now, again, I know he's extremely popular with players. He's extremely popular with certain alumni and some folks on the board. He's extremely popular with some incoming recruits.
Ray Tanner himself, former guy on his staff.
Yeah, exactly. Mostly PJ Orlando, who's the big fish in the recruiting class. The bad thing would be, the worst scenario would be if they keep Monty and then PJ goes ahead and goes pro in the draft after lobbying for him. But the thing about Monty is, and I was going to say, I've talked to a guy that's a former player for Kingston. He played a season for Kingston, and he's a source I've used before. And he's friends with probably his best friend currently on the team is Cole Messina. He's told me he speaks to Cole a good bit, and Cole got caught up a little bit in the Monty hype and was telling him, if Monty gets promoted, I'm going to stay and play his senior year. Now, even my own source said, Cole, that's ridiculous.
That's a top 2-3 round draft pick.
Yeah,
probably,
he said he also knows Cole Messina's agent, and the agent is pretty certain Cole's going within the top 3 rounds. And as a catcher, you just don't see guys that are top 3 rounds coming back. So I think that was just an emotional, and that's what he said too. Just for the record, the source also believes that's completely irrational, and it's not ever going to happen. That Cole has played his last day as a Gamecock. But I just thought that was interesting to pass along. And
yeah, go ahead. You had more?
I just a little bit on Monty too. At College of Charleston, he really had them rolling when he left. They had some good seasons before him, but he had them. But he was also there to transition from the Southern Conference to the CAA, which is probably a little bit better baseball conference, at least. It's hard to remember who's in what conference at what time since everybody has changed, but he transitioned to a more difficult league. He really had Charleston rolling, and then he left. They were kind of on the precipice of maybe being a Coastal Carolina-esque program, or at least at the beginning stages of taking that next step nationally. They lost to. I was going back and just kind of looking at his resume this day. Yeah, they lost a super regional at Texas Tech, and I believe they lost both games 1-0.
Yep,
I believe they're both 1-run games, and then they also the year they were at Coastal in 2010, they lost 2 1-run games to Coastal after beating them and letting Coastal make their way through the losers bracket, and that of course would have set up South Carolina College of Charleston super regional in Columbia. That's of course their super regional where Carolina went down there and Christian Walker blasted their way to Omaha.
Hit a ball very far.
Yeah. So that's kind of the general thoughts on Monty. I wouldn't hate it, but I would feel like it would come across as somewhat lazy and uninspired. But I would be willing to give him a chance.
So I think the last point you make there is good. Talk about being willing to give him a chance. I'm a very big believer in college sports. Any hire can work. Any hire can fail. I think Lamont Paris over at the men's basketball program is pretty good evidence of a guy that a lot of people maybe didn't want, who was fourth, fifth, sixth on Ray Tanner's board in that search 2 years ago, and 2 years later back in the NCAA tournament. So I think I am a big believer in that. However, when you talk about anything can work or fail, the closest, I think we would all agree, the closest program to South Carolina in terms of resources, facilities, investment, fan base, history is probably Clemson, just in terms of similarities. And it didn't work there. It didn't really come close to working. They never got out of a regional. They missed the postseason 2 years in a row for the first time in almost 40 years. I don't really know, and I'm sure if you're looking at this from Monty's camp, if you're a Monty supporter, you'd say, okay, learn from the mistakes. You have the SEC selling point. You can maybe work this a little bit differently. My thing is, you've seen the closest thing to Monty Lee at South Carolina already, and it didn't work. And it would take some convincing, I think, for fans, definitely on my sake, just trying to look at this objectively for why it would be different at South Carolina than it would at Clemson. Is that fair to say, you think?
Yeah, I mean, maybe Monty's got a incredible plan to just absolutely tear up the portal and recruiting, and that he is going to bring in some donors that previously weren't giving to the baseball program, and they're going to, double, triple their NIL to be able to go out and portal recruit. But outside of that, I mean, that's obviously the biggest difference between the portal and NIL was starting to come around. But Alan, you can tell me if I'm wrong. I don't think it was a huge factor in baseball when Monty was at Clemson. Unless he's got just a bang up plan for that, and he's got something in his back pocket there, I tend to agree with you. I mean, that's what it looks like on its face. He didn't get the job done at Clemson. It's going to suggest you're going to get the job done at South Carolina and probably a tougher baseball conference, probably the toughest baseball conference in the country. So,
yeah. So let's go to some other candidates now. I think we start with Cliff Godwin, who is widely reported, and I think we've both heard the same, that is also in the mix here as one of the other kind of near the top of the board. Cliff Godwin, East Carolina head coach since 2007. Is that when he got that job?
I think he is in his, if I'm not mistaken, I think he's in his 10th year. You remember the coach prior to that was Billy
right,
Godwin. Yeah. So they've had a Godwin coach for.
He left Ole Miss in 06. He had to stop in between. Yeah.
Yeah. So he's got a great. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I'm just saying he's got like you said, probably saying, great track record. He hasn't quite gotten ECU to Omaha, but they've been a regular regional team. They've hosted several regionals. They've been, I don't know, you could argue the most consistent mid-major baseball program in the country, even though they haven't won maybe a national title like Coastal has, but probably year to year, the best mid-major.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I think they probably are the premier mid-major program at this point in time. I mean, when you look at him, like you said, he's a former Paul Minari assistant at LSU and Notre Dame. I believe he was with Corbin for at least a season in Vanderbilt. I think Corbin was already there.
Mike Bianco at Ole Miss.
Mike Bianco at Ole Miss, and I have that he has been at East Carolina since 2015.
I have that
the
way
only
off
year.
Okay.
Yeah, well, that's like I said. I think you just probably remember Billy Godwin. Remember the name Godwin. Yeah, I had to look it up and see if they were related because I couldn't remember or I didn't know. But the 2017, his third year in Greenville, is the only year that they did not make the NCAA tournament. He's made 4 super regionals and 9 postseasons, and 8 postseasons. The COVID cancellation knocked that one out. But 4 super regionals. Regionals 1, 2, 3, 4 other seasons. I mean, I know they were the hosts the year that Kingston's first year in 2018 when South Carolina went on the road and won up there and came within a game at Arkansas of getting to the World Series. He's got the track record like you're saying. The only thing he's missing from his resume is an Omaha trip.
So here's what's very interesting about Godwin. Man, I agree with everything you just said. Track record, proven winner, year-to-year sustainability, which I know is tough in college baseball right now, and we're going to talk about that in a second here. What's very interesting to me about Godwin is you start trying to talk about next season, right? Trying to flip a roster, trying to be competitive immediately, kind of do what Georgia did, right, with Wes Johnson in year 1, and they're about to host a super here. East Carolina currently has 9 players in the transfer portal. And obviously, you're not going to take 9 players from East Carolina, but a couple names here. Zach Root, who is one of the best players in the portal, period. He's a pitcher. I saw Kendall Rogers talk about him yesterday as someone He's going to get interest from a lot of SEC schools. He's in the portal right now, one of the best pitchers in the portal, period. Bristol Carter is another one who's already getting some 2026 draft buzz. He's a position player. He's an outfielder, but had a great freshman year this year. I don't want to put numbers on it, but two of the better players in the portal, period, right now. And if there would be interest in following him somewhere, there's always the question at a place like East Carolina, just NIL resources, wanted to play in a bigger school. But are there 9 players in the portal in 3 days because they know something's coming with Cliff Godwin? Is there a possibility of that? That's, to me, what's very interesting about this situation now as we sit here Thursday afternoon is just how quickly ECU's rosters kind of turned, even by the standards of normal college baseball and, I guess, college sports in 2024, and what that could mean if you were to go the Cliff Godwin route.
I think that's got to be something that Ray Tanner's asking some of these candidates that he's speaking to is simply in today's day and age is, can you bring anybody with you? Is there any contributor that you can bring with you? What's your NIL situation like there? What do you think these guys would demand? And, like you said, Carolina's not going to try to go after all 9 of them, and they probably don't want all 9 of them. But the 2 you mentioned, and I saw the list the other day, there might be another 1 or 2 on there too that could come here and all contribute. I mean, those 2 guys you just mentioned would be starters from day one. Yeah. And maybe 1 or 2 other guys off that roster would come in and start on day one, especially considering that South Carolina's losing quite a few players to graduation and quite a few contributors to graduation, and Cole Messina to the draft at least. They'll probably lose a couple others to the draft as well. So, yeah, I think that's got to be a question on the forefront of Tanner's mind. And I don't know if that could be a tea leaf. It's, like you said, there are 9 guys leaving off a team like that.
Yeah. So I think that's kind of the Godwin point right now. My only other question with Godwin is there is the looming possibility of the Ole Miss job opening next year. Mike Bianco certainly feels like he's on his last legs in Oxford after missing the postseason 2 years in a row. Obviously, that's a place he has a lot of ties. I think there's been some thought in college baseball circles that he was kind of waiting for Ole Miss. It was just going to be East Carolina lifer or eventually go back where he spent, I think it was 6 years in Oxford. If you call Cliff Godwin and he says, no, I want to give this 1 more year to see Ole Miss, you can't do anything about that. You at least tried. But I think that would be, I don't want to say the biggest hang up, but the Cliff Godwin hang up is not buyout related. He's making less than Mark Kingston was. You can turn that around financially, I think. So let's, speaking of financially, I'm going to go ahead and group Tom Walter and Chris Pollard together. I think they have very similar track records, very similar resumes. Tom Walter at Wake, Chris Pollard at Duke, both inherited programs that really haven't been on the college baseball map in half a century. Walter got Wake to Omaha last year. Pollard's taken Duke to 3 supers. They haven't even been to the tournament since '61 when he got there. If you want to talk about one of these individually, you can. I think the case for both is pretty similar. But kind of what are your thoughts on Walter and Pollard just kind of together?
Yeah, I think Pollard would be a very solid hire. Yeah. If you can go, win at Duke, a team that's, for the vast majority of his tenure, he started there in 2013. Vast majority of his tenure, NIL and transfer portal weren't a thing. And even though that is now, I seriously doubt Duke has the resources to pump into to their baseball program. That they are pumping a lot of resources into that baseball program to be competitive in those two markets. Pollard lost his top assistant to LSU a few years ago when Jordan went over there, and that's an easy job for Jordan over at LSU. He's got the largest war chest of probably any assistant coach in college baseball right now, and he goes and gets a Paul Skeens and a Tommy Tanks and pretty much anybody else they want. But anyway, so Pollard has done well. I mean, he's a guy. He's been there, like I said, since 13. He's made 6 postseasons. Yep, 3 super regionals. Again, hasn't gotten to Omaha yet, but at Duke, that's not really expected. He did have, and this is so remote, I don't think it would matter. He did take a while to really get Appalachian State going. He did have a good year there his last year, but that's so remote at this point in time that I don't think that would be held against him. Pollard, let's see, he's not a He's not a particularly he's in his 40s, so
Yeah.
it's not he's coached for a long time, but he started young, so it's not as if he's too old for the job. So I think rightfully Chris Pollard should be at the top of Ray Tanner's list, or in the top 3 or 4 names he's looking at.
Yeah, I think what I like about Pollard specifically, if you're looking at this just from a what can it work here, is again, all hires can work, all hires can fail. It's college sports. I'll keep pounding that chest no matter who they hire. But he started a D3 school, 2 conference titles, go to App, get to a regional first time since '87, and only time. They haven't made it back since he left. And then Duke, a place with no real baseball tradition. Again, they hadn't been to even the tournament since 1961. He's made that pretty much a regular thing, and a Kumar Rocker no-hitter in a super regional away from going to Omaha in 19, if we're being honest about it, plus 2 other trips to super. So it's kind of worked everywhere. He's shown you at 3 different levels, D3, mid-major, Power 5, that here's the blueprint, here's what we're going to follow, here's how this is going to work, these are the results. And there's no reason to think it wouldn't work other than just it's college baseball, it's competitive, and sometimes things don't bounce your way. But every other place he's been, it has worked, which is why I kind of think I would give him a little nod over Walter.
Yeah, I think if he fell in if Pollard came and he wasn't successful and South Carolina was looking again in another 5 or 6 years, then I think he would fall into the Chad Holbrook category of you can't blame Ray Tanner for that one. Everything on his resume looked like he was right for the job. Nobody should complain about that if he's the guy. If it doesn't, like you've been saying all day, if it sometimes it just doesn't work, and if it doesn't work, that's just not one you can chalk up on Ray Tanner.
Yeah.
But yeah, I agree. I think he would be an extremely solid hire. I think the fan base would. I can't imagine there'd be too many people saying no, we don't like him, we don't want him. That's not a good choice.
Yeah, so that's kind of the top of the board, I think. Now, I guess I kind of wanted to open up to you, and there's some other names we've both talked about already in our respective stories you can check out on GamecockScoop. Outside of, I guess we talked about 4 now: Lee, Godwin, Pollard, Walter. If you had to go kind of off those 4, maybe a little bit more off board, do you have a name in mind? Do you have a couple names in mind you wanted to talk about on the space for a little bit?
Yeah, sure. I think there's a few that are worth it. One other quick note on Walter, and I know I mentioned this on the board, is Wake is apparently getting some pretty strong NIL funding for baseball, and that's evident by the fact that they pulled Chase Burns out of the portal last year. That he had a great year at Tennessee. He would have been a start in their starting rotation, probably their Friday or Saturday night guy this year, and he enters the portal, and Wake comes out of there. I mean, there's not a team in the country that didn't want that guy, and Wake got him. So that's one consideration there on Walter. He may have a better situation there than what we realize.
Sure.
So, but I'm sorry, to go back to your original question. Yeah. So some other names. I mean, let's start with the one that's going to get kicked around the message boards. If it wasn't at South Carolina, he wouldn't be considered for this job. But let's
go ahead and address
about Landon Powell.
Yeah.
I don't think Landon Powell is quite there yet. Is ready for this job yet. He might be. I mean, if you've won somewhere, maybe he has that winning formula. I don't know. He hasn't had to deal with the portal, with NIL, with stuff like that at North Greenville. That's obviously not an issue with there. I mean, that they get transfers usually from bigger programs, but they don't. At there he doesn't have to worry about making the puzzle pieces of NIL all work out for his players there. They live in Greenville, which is where I am, and his wife's a Greenville native, and I don't know them in particular, but I know some people. We have some common friends and common sources, and I was told that Ray Tanner told Landon Powell last year, if you're happy where you are, stay. Don't look around. If you like what you're doing, if you like where you are, stay. You're not going to want to deal with some of the headaches that now these coaches at larger schools are having to deal with. Again, I don't know Powell's financial situation, but I believe back when he played, his father, he was from North Carolina, outside the Raleigh area, I believe, and his father had an agreement with Tanner not to put him on a scholarship, not to use one of those 11.7 scholarships because he could financially afford to pay his own way, and he wanted to go to Omaha, and he wanted them to use that money and scholarship money on other players. I do remember his dad was frequently down, at games at the Sarge Fry Field in his RV. So again, I don't. That's all speculation. I don't know what their financial situation is. I don't know because I'm certain that this would be probably an 8-9 time, salary bump for what he makes at North Greenville, and it might be more than that even to come here. So I don't know. I think that South Carolina is one of the few jobs that he would take if it was offered, and I think he would even take. I think we've written about this. I think he would even take an assistant job at South Carolina if it was offered. I think.
Yeah, I think the Landon Powell. I think the Landon Powell thing. It's been a very, like you said, a very popular name on message boards, on social media. On, I guess 2 points here. One, and you kind of led with this, but if he wasn't an alum, if he wasn't one of the greatest players in program history, would anybody care who the coach is at North Greenville? I think that's one. And then two, you talked about Chris Pollard and at the time Chad Holbrook being a hire that everyone can kind of get around, that you can kind of piece the logic together. It makes sense. Everyone's united. Fair to say Landon Powell would be the most divisive hire you could make. Half the fan base would love it. You brought a legend back. Half the fan base would say, what are you doing? It's a D2 guy.
Probably. Maybe him or Monty for sure.
Yeah, Monty the other one, just because the Clemson track record. But yeah.
Those two would be the most polarizing for sure. And I don't think Landon Powell. I mean, I get why he's included because people are going to talk about him, but I don't think he's probably a legitimate head coaching candidate this time around. Yeah. For Tanner, could be, but I certainly don't think so. I've heard no indication that yeah. He is. Some guys, if we're going to talk about some other names that I. One of the popular ones early on, and I say early on, it's only been like a 4-day search, but it seems like it's been much longer.
Yeah,
was Chris Lemonis from Mississippi State. I think that there's a feeling that he might be on the hot seat, even though he won a national title in 2021. But I haven't heard a whole lot of traction with his name recently. I don't know if he is being seriously considered or vetted or anything.
I think
anything like that.
The Lemonis point is, if you're just wondering if he kind of wanted to, before this year, I think that was a more popular poll. He just missed the postseason 2 years in a row. His seat certainly was hot in Starkville. And you're just wondering, okay, maybe he wants to reset his clock, right? Maybe he wants to go to a similar program, resources, things like that. But I think he kind of already did that this year by just getting State back to a regional, almost hosting, had a very solid season there. Yeah. So I agree with you. I think that's kind of one of your more out of left field candidates. I wanted to throw Josh Elander on the board here, the recruiting coordinator at Tennessee. That's a name we've both heard a little bit the last 3-4 days. Obviously, Tennessee is still playing right now. They have a super regional starting tomorrow. So you'd have a little bit of a trickier time on that front. But it's not impossible. You just saw Georgia hire Wes Johnson while he was in Omaha with LSU last year. To me, this is one that I think if you wanted to go I understand, and I kind of side with wanting someone with head coaching experience, wanting someone who's kind of done that, especially done that in the Power 5 level. If you wanted to go the assistant route, I think this is about as well as you could do, just in terms of the recruiting success at Tennessee. Obviously, I mean, you don't have to look at it. They're 2 wins away from going to Omaha 3 times in 4 years, and it'd be 4 straight supers. I think it kind of speaks for itself.
That's right, and let's face it, they're playing Evansville in their super region.
I thought that about Notre Dame 2 years ago, but point taken.
I know that's right. Point taken. Tennessee should be in Omaha. Yes. So yeah, I mean, there's a reason why he's going to be a head coach somewhere very soon.
Yeah,
is it going to be South Carolina? I don't know. I know Tanner. Sources I've heard have trickled down that have said that he does want a sitting head coach. At least that was what or somebody with head coaching experience. That was what he preferred. Obviously, Elander doesn't check that box, but he is a top-notch assistant at the best program probably over the last 4 years, like you said. And he, but there's Holbrook as an example. There's plenty of surefire big name assistants who've gotten their job, they've gotten in the big seat and failed. So he is certainly no automatic. And I think, but going back to what we talked about earlier, if Elander is there, it seems a little dirty, but it's just the world of college athletics these days. I think another question has to be, can you bring anybody with you? Who would come with you? Are there any of your guys that are loyal to you that would want to come down? And I'm sure he wouldn't want to raid, his boss's roster, Tony Vitello's roster. But, if he could take 2 or 3 guys that could come down and contribute, maybe they're not even starters at Tennessee, or maybe they're platoon players or relief pitchers, something like that he could bring down. I think that has to be discussed too. The only other assistant besides, Monty that I think would really maybe garner any type of consideration, we touched on him earlier, is Jordan, first name, Josh as well.
You got it, yeah.
Yeah, Josh Jordan at LSU, again, Pollard disciple. He's their recruiting coordinator, although that's probably one of the easiest jobs in college baseball at this point in time. So yeah. I don't know if he's been an assistant for a long time. So either he's one of those guys that's either going to be very choosy about what job came open, or he's happy where he is and doesn't care anything about running a program. So he's on the list, I think, as an assistant. One of the names I think I put him up on the picture on the picture of my hot board was Kevin O'Sullivan.
Okay.
Just because that was so I've got pretty good authority in 2017.
That was the guy in 17. Yeah.
That was really, really cool. That was very, very close to happening. To the point where if Florida did not make that run and win the World Series and go deep in the World Series, that probably was going to be the guy in 17. I
think it's an entirely different conversation now, though. Florida's got a ballpark. They've had a huge investment in facilities. You talked about the money point earlier. Kevin O'Sullivan, between buying him out, buying his staff out, you're definitely north of $1 million. You're probably pushing $2 million to make that coaching move.
Yeah, I'm certain of it. You're spending a lot of money there, and I don't think I don't think that's probably realistic this time around. I threw him on there simply because he was there in 2017. One of the guys, I tried to go a little bit more just outside the box on this and throw some names on there that I have no sources told me is actually in the running or anything like that. But some guys that I don't know if it'd be worth kicking the tires on. He has no experience at all in the Southeast. And he took over a program that was already in good shape, but Mitch Canham at Oregon State. And the only reason I even put him on a list, I don't know if he's a serious contender.
The conference situation at Oregon State, you're thinking?
I mean, Oregon, they've seen all of their programs just completely gutted by the portal. I don't know if they're still playing. So obviously we don't know what, how bad their baseball program will be hit by the portal, but are these guys going to want to play in the West Coast Conference or whoever they're going to be playing against next year? Maybe, but I don't know.
I don't think that's realistic just because he's such an Oregon State guy. He played there under Pat Casey. I don't think that's going to happen. I respect you for throwing a name out there. And I do think Oregon State, very specific, I guess them in Washington State, but that's not a baseball factor. Oregon State specifically is in a very unique position in college athletics right now of just getting rated. We saw it in women's basketball. We've seen it in football. They lost their football coach. I think that's interesting, but I also would not even have him in a top 15 or 20 on the South Carolina board, realistically. Yeah. One other name that we haven't talked about yet is Dan McDonnell at Louisville.
Yeah, that's the one we needed probably.
Yeah, that was widely believed, I think, for years to be thought to be, okay, this is going to be the first call if Mark gets clipped. I know that was the thought in 2022 when Mark ran it pretty close, missing the postseason. This, to me, and I wrote this is the highest risk, high risk reward possible name on the board. Dan McDonnell's been to Omaha 5 times. He's won over 700 games. He knows what it's about in college baseball. However, salary's over $1.2 million. So you got to start with that. You got to probably up that plus his buyout, plus his assistants. So you're probably talking even more than Kevin O'Sullivan or about on par money-wise. And 2, they've missed the postseason 4 out of 5 years now. Does need a change of scenery. I know he's talked a lot about needing more investment in baseball than he gets at Louisville. He would definitely have that at South Carolina, at least from a facilities perspective. Highest risk, highest reward name to me, but I'm curious your thoughts.
Yeah, he's been very vocal about that. I mean, just in interviews, and I think they lost a super regional at A&M a few years ago. If I'm not mistaken, I think that was the last one he went to was a loss at A&M, and he was very vocal afterward about just the difference in being in that ballpark versus being in the park that he plays in. And I don't know what, that's an interesting one, Alan, because I don't know what happened. I mean, a decade ago, you used to always hear that Louisville was a very well-funded ACC program, and they had a lot of big-name boosters. I know they had to fall out with Papa John, but I don't think he was their only.
Was pizza money funding the baseball trip to Omaha?
Yeah, yeah. I don't think he was the only guy there. So, their basketball program has fallen on extremely hard times, and that should never really happen at a school like Louisville with their tradition and their history. But they've been just awful the last few years, and their football's been mediocre. I wouldn't say they've been great, but they haven't been awful. They haven't fallen off a cliff, but yes, I have to agree with you. He's got to be mentioned. There's nobody that Carolina's going to look at that they probably have a realistic shot with that has that track record, that has 5 trips to Omaha, that has, like I said, over 700 wins and has his level of success. Like I said, he is expensive, and the other, red flags are just simply, is he missing the postseason? Is he struggling in the NIL portal era because he's getting no backing?
Your time frame
or
there.
Or is that him? Is he one of these guys like a Dabo Sweeney that just doesn't like to do this stuff? He's very old-fashioned, old school. I've heard a little bit of rumor that Godwin, to revert back to him, has some of those tendencies. I don't know if that's true. I'm trying to find some more out about that, but I haven't. I'll write about it if I can hear it, if I can confirm anything on that. But I haven't heard anything about that yet. But McConnell, that's just the or McDonald, excuse me, that's just the big. That's the big hang up there. I think if there wasn't that issue, if he was, getting players out of the portal and things like that, I think he'd probably be Ray's first call.
I think that's one of those where it's just kind of started to look worse the longer it's gone on. Where if we're talking about this 2 years ago, that's the first call. If we're talking about it last year, he'd probably be in the top 3 or 4, and now it's okay. It's even in the top 3 or 4.
Yeah, and good question. It's he's he's another one. I would think that if Ray was going to get him, I think that would be done relatively quickly. They're not anymore. They didn't make the postseason. If he wanted him, that could have been something that's been in the works for a little while. Because I don't think Ray woke up Monday morning and decided it was time to get rid of Mark Kingston. I think that was probably in the works all year. If there was no super regional, that was going to happen. So that seems like a guy that he would have moved relatively quick on. I know there's the money situation as we talked about, but I feel like that would have been. I feel like the longer it drags, the less likely he is as a candidate. But I could be wrong. So I think we've covered all the big ones.
So I'm gonna
go ahead. Somebody out of left field.
I'm gonna end this here with one more question for you. Let's say you're Ray Tanner, your phone's at 5% battery, you got enough juice to make 3 phone calls in order. Who would your 1, 2, not saying they have to say yes, but of the names we've talked about in order, who would your first call, second call, third call go?
Well, one would not be Monty Lee, because if you want to talk to Monty Lee and your phone's about to die, just hop in here, do a Friday Night Lights style where you show up at his house at 1 a.m., ring the doorbell, and it's as if cell phones don't exist on that show. So you just show up. Like Coach Taylor does, and just show up at somebody's house at 1 o'clock. So I wouldn't put him on there, but I do think I think your 3 are going to be Godwin, Pollard. And excluding Lee, if I had to go with the 4th, I would say probably the 4th most likely right now is probably Walter or McDonald, one of those 2. If I had to do a top 5, those are probably them: Monty, Pollard, Walter, Godwin, and McDonald.
I think if I'm Ray, what I would do, although I think you got it pretty close for what's actually going on here. My first call would be Pollard for all the reasons we discussed. I think it would work. I think the fans would get behind that. I think there's enough of a track record at enough different levels to think it would work in the SEC. My second call would be Godwin for all the stuff we talked about, chance to flip the roster quick, track record at East Carolina. And third would probably be Elander, even though I think Walter's probably a close 4th, just because I know the assistant route is risky, but I also think what he's done at Tennessee kind of speaks for itself. And a lot of people in that building credit him as much as they credit Vitello for kind of building that thing up to where it is now. So that would be my 3. If my phone was at 5%, I could only call 3, but obviously we're on day 4. So there's been a lot more than that.
Right. And you did ask me who I would call. Yes. And I think you're right. I mean, I think those are, I would have no problem with those 3 as the 3. I do think I'd agree. Pollard and Godwin are the first 1 and 2 in some order. And then, like you said, if you're sitting on 1%, you got enough time to make one more. I'll go with Walter just because of the Omaha trip. But yes,
Yep.
Elander is let's face it, Tony Vitello doesn't seem like he's a very sunny guy. He doesn't.
That's a very charitable way to put it.
Maybe he is behind closed doors and players, like that, but he doesn't seem like he's full of personality and that he would be some ace recruiter. So somebody there has to be, somebody there is doing it, and it might be all him. So yes, like you said, that could end up being and the good thing about those three are even those four, McDonald probably excluded, but those Pollard, Walter, Godwin, or Elander, I don't think you get a lot of pushback from the fan base. I think that
I agree.
I think those four are almost, you'll always have a few, but I bet they would almost be universally accepted. I bet it would be one of those things where as soon as season tickets went on sale, you'd sell, 20% more, 25% more than you did the prior year.
Yeah, I think that amount of apathy that kind of set in towards the end of last year was reason enough to make the change beyond the baseball reasons. I think it's a good point too. You can't obviously base it on the fans, but you got to make a hire here that I think gives you a chance to make Founders Park look like what it's supposed to look like. I'm going to leave it there for now. Thanks for listening as always, Stephen. Thanks for joining me. I hope by the time we're back next week, we record once a week. If you're new here, there's a new head coach at South Carolina, because I can't imagine the search going to like day 11. That sounds miserable. But please check out GamecockScoop.com. We've got content on all the coaching search, on everything else going on in Gamecock land. Social media at Rivals Gamecock on Twitter, Facebook, all that stuff. And until next time, Alan and Steven, baseball coaching search talk.
Yep. Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.